Hey folks, welcome. This is obviously the Demonology guide. We're gonna go into it. Is it a little bit different than what I was expecting? I've kind of recorded this so many times now, I've lost count. But the reason for that is because, realistically, not a lot's changed since the pre-patch. I think I went quite in-depth during the pre-patch, and kind of repeating the sound of my own voice is a little bit irritating both to me and I imagine to you as well. So this guide is going to be more of a dungeon focused discussion about a few key talents, the differences between my build and a build you might see on Wowhead and why those are there, and just generally how one might approach going forward, that rather than necessarily thinking, right, we pick this talent for this reason, this talent for this reason, as I did previously. Because I feel like just repeating my pre-patch guide and just going, oh yeah, we've now added 5 extra points, go book wild and have fun, would be a disservice to you guys. So, with that kind of out of the way, let's get into the video as a whole, discuss where you can see the differences and why, and what that means potentially going forwards. There will be an honourable mention for the Nether portal build, but it is my belief that the Nether portal build is generally going to be seen at much higher tyrannical levels when Season 1 comes out, or will be the raid build, rather than it being the dungeon build with something like Guillotine. So, starting with the class tree then. I'm not going to do this for every video where it comes to the class tree, because there's not a lot to change. The only real honourable mention for it and why it's getting mentioned is because, as I showed in my Halls of Infusion guide, please do go watch that if you haven't already. It's kind of, it gives you insight into how I do dungeons during this early stage of an expansion, and how I kind of build pull styles, especially if I'm playing with friends. So Burning Rush is now our movement speed. We still have things like Demonic Gateway, Demonic Circle, but those are either proactive placements or, you know that you're going to be coming back to a location. So you've got to go into a dead-end room to kill a mob to then come back out. Those kind of things. Or if you're looking to Demonic Gateway skip. Not much to be said there. Our only reactionary movement speed now, so say the tank decides to book it, which, let's be fair, given the popularity of Prot Warriors, Guardian Druids, Monks, Demon Hunters, they're all really mobile. If they wanted to just go, yeah, you know what, sodding it, we're pulling to the first boss, and there's not a goddamn hope in hell you're going to stop me, they will just book it. And it's when they book it, you need Burning Rush. Otherwise, you're just going to get there and there's not going to be a pack left to fight. Which kind of sucks. So, in that vein, a talent that I feel is kind of mandatory at the moment is Fiendish Stride. Reduces the damage dealt by Burning Rush by 50%, so it doesn't rot our health as quickly, but it also gives us an additional 10% movement speed while we're doing it, which is really quite nice. It's a nice quality of life gain that I've had since picking this, and allowing me to use Burning Rush a little bit more aggressively to stay in line with tanks or stay just ahead of them, so that if they do decide that they want to pull an extra 1 or 2 packs and still stay within the same room, I'm within range of them. It's nice, and when you consider that you've got things like Mortal Coil, Dark Pact, and then you've got, your Soul Link, Fell Energy, and just Drain Life, basically, I can be really abusive to my health bar. End of the day, it's a resource. Especially for Warlocks, if you've been playing long enough to remember the likes of old Life Tap for mana, when we had 3 forms of resources that we had to manage effectively. So, Fiendish Stride, definitely a go-to for the moment, and will likely continue to be so until you hit that point in Season 1, Mythic Plus-wise, where tanks have to either, 1, be more static, or 2, you start running the risk of dying to things. Whether it be bomb mechanics going off, kicks not being done, skips not working quite as you think, and then you have to start going into something like Profane Bargain to give you that little bit of defensive health as you're about to die, or something like, I don't know, Grim Feast or Resolute Barrier. Those kind of defensive choices are going to be up to you, because the difference between me playing and you playing, you might be much better at utilizing potions, your health cookies, your gateways, your things, whereas I might just actively go, right, okay, I can get these kicks, so I'm just going to tongues everything, get the kicks, and just keep burning rush on. Also depends on your healer as well. Now, for the demonology tree as a whole, again, not a lot's really changed. There's a huge emphasis on our dog build. I'm going to right-click the entire talent tree, and we're kind of going to go through it. But we're going to go through it faster than we used to. The reason for this is because, again, a lot of this is the same from the pre-patch. So I will link the pre-patch guide below. Please just revise that for the things that you need an additional explanation on, or comment below, and I will happily explain things to you in the chat. So, Dreadstalkers, Demon Bolt, Anilian Training, you're going to be picking these up. You then start having a few options in terms of how you want the fight to go and what we're looking for. Now, the reality is, we're going to be looking at this from a dungeon perspective, and if need be, I will release a slightly more raid-centric guide when that comes out, if it turns out that some of this information is incorrect. So, in that vein, we're going to want to look at our AoE talents. We're going to want to pick up Demonic Knowledge. Hand of Gul'dan has a 15% chance to generate our Charge of Core. This used to be a conduit in Shadowlands. It's now baseline. It allows us to pick up Implosion. We need Demonic Knowledge, and even if we weren't picking up Implosion, Demonic Knowledge would be a go-to, because we want those Demonic Core procs. Now, this is kind of where we're at in terms of the left branch. This is as far as we want to go for now. This does mean that we still have 3 points to spend. The question is, where are we going to spend them? Now, we're going to want to pick up Demonic Strength, and it's either Demonic Strength or Bile Scourge Bombers. The reason for this is because we want Carnivorous Stalkers. Because Carnivorous Stalkers, our Dreadstalkers, have a 10% chance to trigger an additional Dreadbite. Dreadbite does a huge amount of damage, and again, kind of feeds back into that old dog build. Now, we're going to want to pick up Fel and Steel for that reason. Fellstorm and Dreadbite deal 10% additional damage. This means that both our Felguard and our dogs are doing more damage. Opening up the next tier. Because this is dungeon focused, we are going to want to back up and get Dreadlash and From the Shadows. This means that our dogs are going to be doing their Dreadbite to a cleave in front of them, so it becomes a conal cleave, and simultaneously their Dreadbite will allow or cause the targets to take 20% additional Shadow Flame damage. That's Implosion damage and Demon Bolt damage as well, because Dreadlash is the cleave, 8 yards, and deals 10% more damage, and From the Shadows is obviously the dot component. Now, this is where things start getting a bit spicy. The reason for that is because we have a few choices. Now, we're going to want to come down and grab Dread Calling. Now, there's 2 ways you can do this. You can either come down through Shadow's Bite to grab it, or you can come through Inner Demons and grab it. I, in my infinite wisdom, that's sarcasm by the way, this is just personal preference, I put 1 point in both. Now, this gives me Shadow's Bite, so that when my Summoned Dreadstalkers fade away, my Demon Bolts do 10% additional damage for 8 seconds. This isn't huge, but it's a personal preference thing for me. The Wowhead guides and other guides you'll see will actually have you run 2-1, so 2 points in Inner Demons. The only difference from an Inner Demons perspective is actually the 5 versus 10% chance of spawning an additional demon. It doesn't actually affect your imps. And given the fact that you take 2 points into Imp Gang Boss, every time you summon a wild imp, whether it's through Inner Demons or Hand of Gul'dan, you have a 30% chance to summon a wild imp or an Imp Gang Boss instead. These do 50% additional damage because they were buffed, but when imploded, an Imp Gang Boss will summon a wild imp. This can chain. So you can end up in a situation where you can very rapidly implode in larger packs. You can go from like a 10 imp implosion to an 8 imp implosion to a 7 imp implosion. It depends on how lucky you are in terms of also like proc timings within a demons, as well as like Hand of Gul'dan's and how else you're doing it as well. It can be a very rapid thing, and bearing in mind you have From the Shadows during Dreadstalker's windows, as well as other talents that we're going to talk about, you can do a huge amount of damage really quickly. It's kind of bonkers just how much Wild Imp Gang Boss has changed how we use Implosion. Because it used to be that you try and time Implosion for like just as a set of imps were about to expire, so you'd constantly have like a 6 or 9 imp Implosion. Now we don't really care about their energy levels. If we have 13 imps out for whatever reason, because we've been lucky with procs, we implode them. That's it. We just implode. Like, the moment you hit 6 imps, you can implode. It's really nice because it gives us that kind of snappy burst AoE, which is kind of why Demonology at the moment is dominating the lower mythics. Especially when you consider that Burning Rush gets us to a pack, and then we can just, like, come around a corner, immediately implode, send in the Felguard, Demonic Strength to Fellstorm it, and then just Dreadstalkers. And with that kind of combination discussed, let's actually go into this particular area, this far right quadrant, because what we want is we want to pick up Felsunder. Now, we've got 2 ways we can do this. We can either go directly through Grimmer Felguard or Felmight, either one, to pick up Felsunder, which would enable you to have your Demonic Meteor and 2 points in ripped through the portal, while then having, going into this final tier and choosing these. Now, there's a decision to be made here with Demonic Calling and Grimmer Felguard, and we'll discuss them at the end once we've dedicated the rest of our points, so you can kind of see why. So, we're going to want to pick up Antoran Armaments. Your Felguard deals 20% additional damage. Soul Strike now deals 25% of its damage to nearby targets, or nearby enemies. Now, you'll notice that we haven't actually picked up Soul Strike, and the reason we haven't, for this at least, is because with the kiting meta, essentially, or the high movement situation that we're in at the moment, Soul Strike has a really short range. It's only 8 yards. And if you don't have something like a Frost Mage, or you haven't previously had for want of a better term, a Death Ball made by your tank, and these mobs are all strewn out, depending on where your Felguard is, you could hit 1 target, or you could maybe hit 3 or 8. You don't know, and realistically we can get better value out of our other talents than Soul Strike, which is a 10-second cooldown, which, in order for it to be of use, you've got to use it pretty much on cooldown. And there's a good chance that you're actually not going to get the AoE value from it, so it's not huge. It's still more of a single target talent choice, with Antoran Armaments kind of just making it but it can cleave type setting. So it's more of like a raider's choice, because you will be able to pick this up in a raid setting, and I'll kind of demonstrate a little bit how that might look when we discuss the Nether Portal Mythic Plus build. But from there, we're also going to want to pick up our Tyrant. Now, we've got a choice between Reign of Tyranny or Grand Warlock's Design, formerly known as Wilfred's. Now, Grand Warlock's Design, every time you spend a Soul Shard, it reduces the cooldown of your summoned Demonic Tyrant by 0.6 per second. This means that on average, your Tyrant's going to be about a minute, versus Reign of Tyranny, which keeps it at a 1.5 minute, but buffs the ass out of it. I say that, it's nowhere near as strong as Demonic Consumption used to be. Like, Reign of Tyranny Tyrants are okay. They're stronger than if you don't have it. But Tyrant, for the most part, has kind of turned itself into a pet extending, does a bit of damage type cooldown. Almost like Dark Glare, in a weird sense. It's almost like Dark Glare and Tyrant have kind of swapped positions, because Dark Glare previously would just extend dots for an Affliction Warlock and do next to no damage. Like, I used to have trinkets that did more damage than this 2-minute cooldown. It was just a dot extender. To Demonology's Tyrant now kind of doing the same thing. It just extends the duration of all my imps. And it's my imps that clap, because of this particular ability here, which is Infernal Command. While your Felguard is active, your Wild Imps and Dreadstalkers deal 50% additional damage. Now, your Tyrant is going to extend the duration of your Wild Imp gang bosses as well, and they do 50% more damage. So you can kind of see where this is going. But what this also means is you can get some really big implosion numbers out, because if you go with Grand Warlock's Design, so you have a minute Tyrant, this means that every minute, so almost every other pack, at kind of like Mythic 0, Mythic 2 onwards, up until a certain level, you will basically have a Tyrant for every other pack, to every pack, when you start getting higher. What this means is you can essentially extend your imps to the point where you can go into like 17 or 18 imp implosions into packs, when you've got your Dreadstalkers, you've got them taking additional damage from the shadows, they're dread lashing, they're proccing with Carnivorous Stalkers, and they're doing 10% more damage anyway because you've got your Felguard out. Now, this then kind of feeds into an ability called a talent called the Expendables. When your wild imps die or expire, your other demons are inspired and gain 1% additional damage, stacking up to 10 times. This is huge. If you go into a 10 imp implosion immediately after summoning your Dreadstalkers for the remainder of their duration are going to clap like trucks. As is your Felguard. Like, your Felguard pretty much permanently keeps this. So your Felguard absolutely hits like a truck. And that then kind of feeds into Felsunder, which increases the damage that your pets do to the target up to 5%. This does go into implosion damage as well, so imploding a Felsunder is beneficial, but also guillotine as well. So you'd end up in this situation where, for a pull, you'd have your Felguard charge in. He's either Felstorming normally, your Demonic Strength stormed, or something like that. You then Dreadstalker in, they go in, from the shadows to everything. 5 stacks of Felsunder on the target. They've now got from the shadows. You've got 10 imps ready. You implode. Now, the next thing you can do is, if you haven't already, you can Demonic Strength. And Demonic Strength is going to do a huge amount of damage, capping on Felsunder, but is also going to refresh Felsunder. The moment that expires, or if you've already Demonic Strength and it's up, or it's on its cooldown already, you can go into Guillotine. Now, Guillotine does have the caveat of needing your targets to be stacked. Think Death and Decay, Wild Spirits for BM Hunters, things like that. Because your Felguard hurls his weapon to the location you set. It does pulsing AoE Shadow Flame damage, which, remember, from the shadows, they're going to be taking 20% more damage from this. But while unarmed, your Felguard's basic attacks deal damage to all nearby enemies, and it attacks 50% faster. This also kind of feeds into Felsunder as well. So you end up in this position where you can very rapidly stack damage for these short burst windows. You've got to bear in mind that Guillotine, Tyrant, if you're running Grim Warlock's design, without going Grim or Felguard, you can literally burst every 45 seconds to a minute. And that's like your full quote-unquote burst. Just having dogs and implosions still do a substantial amount of damage on their own because of how bursty Demonology is. We don't have a traditional AoE style as other specs do. If you were to look at our damage profile, again, going back to all those prep videos I did for Shadowlands, we end up in this position where our DPS is ramp spike drop, and we kind of end up with almost like a heart rate monitor for our DPS as a Demonology Warlock, because we're ramping up to the point where we can burst. We have our dogs, we have our imps, we have the implosion, we have our Felguard Felstorming, and it's really tight stacked AoE, really stacked cleave AoE, whereas something like Affliction or Destruction can do spread cleave rather well through either Havoc, Pandemonium, Mayhem, Cry Havoc, Rain of Fire, Channel Demon Fire, those sort of abilities. Whereas Affliction doesn't care about distance. If it can multi-dot, it will be fine. The problem is, once it's multi-dotted, it needs that time to ramp. While things are stacked, it can ramp faster, but it still has that moment of ramp and then maintenance. But as a result, it doesn't burst as high. Demonology, on the other hand, can go, right, okay, you've just pulled the 10 mobs together. I have a business proposition for you. You have 10 mobs stacked together. I have Core Dreadstalkers and Implosion. I proceed to trade you for 50k DPS. Let's go. And you can kind of see where the thing goes, which is why at the moment Demonology is doing so well in dungeons, and why it's kind of being seen as the dungeon spec for the time being. Obviously, as we get to higher keys, and we see how things are living long enough, and kind of pull styles when, brighter minds than me come up with it, then we may see a shift to Affliction or Destruction. Especially if we're seeing a 2-minute centered AoE build, or a much more focused kind of single target priority focus where you've got like one large mob and everything else just needs to rot around it. But that kind of brings us back into this final point. You can see that we're kind of floating around and we haven't quite addressed it. And we have a bit of a choice. We could go Grim of Felguard, which gives us that 2-minute cooldown. It's additional burst. It's really nice. Means that we kind of go into that 1 minute, 2-minute burst cycle with our tyrants, where we'll have like a mini tyrant, big tyrant, cardboard box. But not only that, but the Grim of Felguard's Fellstorm will also feed into Sunder. So you can increase the amount of uptime you have on Felsunder by quite a bit over the course of a dungeon through the use of your Felguard. However, by doing so, it means you give up the instant procs that we can get from Demonic Calling. Because remember, Demonic Calling gives our Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolts a 10 to 20% chance to make your next call Dreadstalkers cost no shards and have no cast time. Which, when you're running around, is really, really good, because it means that we can summon our Dreadstalkers, and the only thing that we then have to sit and hardcast in any way, shape, or form realistically is Hand of Gul'dan. But for Hand of Gul'dan, we're not necessarily worried about hitting 8 or 9 targets with a Hand of Gul'dan. We just need to hit 1 to spawn our 3 imps, because it's based off our shards. And then it's the getting the mobs to come around a corner so they're stacked, and then dropping an implosion on them when you've had imps. Because the other thing as well is you've got to bear in mind is imps energy and the way they decay means that they have to be hitting something. So if you can get a couple of Hand of Gul'dans out and then the mob's out of range, so your imps have to chase after it, and you're chasing after it to then get ahead of the pack to then drop more Hand of Gul'dans and kind of rinse and repeat, you can get to a stage quite quickly where you end up with rather large strewn out packs to just implode because all your imps have kind of like staggered themselves and not had anything to cast. But I personally would sacrifice Fell Might's Fellstorm reduction for Demonic Calling. Which, oh well, I say I sacrifice, but it forces me into a decision where I either take Grim of Felguard for its cooldown usage, or I have Fell Might for a more consistent Fellstorm from my main Felguard. Now, the way I play, as you can see, I don't have Fell Might. I have a point in Demonic Calling, I have a point in Shadow's Bite, and only 1 point in Inner Demons rather than 2. The reason for this is because I'm focusing about putting most of the damage into my imps and my implosions, so I don't necessarily need that extra chance to summon additional demons. But by having Shadow's Bite, it means if for whatever reason I don't have, dogs out, I'm running from pack to pack, if my dogs expire, I can still do that little bit more damage while I'm demon bolting and prepping myself to then go into the next burst as we run around a pack. Again, this is the build I ran through a lot of my dungeons last week while I was playtesting. So if you, again, kind of want to see how that works in a dungeon, please do go see my Halls of Infusion guide. But I am going to leave this here in terms of a video. Oh, no, actually, I'm not. Because I just remembered I did promise you guys that we would be looking at the Nether Portal build. I do apologize. Let's get into the Nether Portal. So, we'll just refresh the points there for a moment, and we will have Nether Portal. So you're going to want to take Antoran Armaments because you still want that 20% additional damage for your Felguard, but it then opens us up to pick up Nether Portal, Ner'zhul's Violation, and then Gul'dan's Ambition. Now, for this particular build, what I would do is, if I just take a point out of that for a second, there, is have the build look like this. Now, the reason for this is because we want to increase the amount of Felsunder uptime we have, especially when it comes to your Nether Portal windows. Now, unfortunately, this particular build ends up in this really jank position where you basically have 3 rotating cooldowns. You have a 3-minute, 2-minute, or a 1-minute cooldown. Which means that there's going to be some elements, like this 3-minute cooldown, where you're going to get huge benefit from it. Because what you're essentially going to want to do is build up to 5 shards, hit Nether Portal, hit Grim of Felguard, maybe Caster Dogs, Hand of Gul'dan, Tyrant, Hand of Gul'dan, Hand of Gul'dan, Shadowbolt, Hand of Gul'dan, and you basically then just want to use your Hand of Gul'dans on either 1 or 2 shards rather than 3, because Nether Portal paired with Nezul's Volition and Gul'dan's Ambition, you want to spend as many shards as physically possible, and every time you spend soul shards, you will also command demons from the Nether to come out and fight for you, which means you're summoning a demon. Then, when Nether Portal summons a demon, it has a 30% chance to summon an additional demon. Bearing in mind it only lasts for 15 seconds, so you've got to be quick. You've got to get as many shards spent as you can in this period. But when the Nether Portal ends, you summon a Pit Lord that gains power based on how many demons you summoned, up to 20 demons. While Nether Portal was active, the Pit Lord then lasts for 10 seconds. Now, this Pit Lord absolutely claps cheeks. And during testing, it got to the point where you actually wanted to PI the Pit Lord. Pit Lord go burr. And it was a bit bonkers, really. But due to the nature of Nether Portal and the fact that it is a 3-minute cooldown, it's single target focused, really. Because although the Pit Lord might cleave a little, all the other pets are primarily single target. Bile Scourge Bombers are slightly different and the exception to that, but you can't rely on the RNG for that. It's not like it's a case of you summon 5 shards, you get a Dreadstalker, you spend 10 shards, you get a Bile Scourge Bomber, you spend 15 shards, you get a Shavera, you spend 20 shards, you get a Pit Lord. If it was something like that, then that would be great, because that would then give you that onus of, okay, this pet's needed for this situation, this pet's needed for this. If a Shavera did like AoE damage, along with the Bile Scourge Bomber, you knew you'd hit 15 shots and that's where you want to stop. But if you want to go giga single target, you want the Pit Lord. That kind of territory. Which would be nice. A little bit complex for something like Nether Portal, but you can kind of get the idea behind it. So I think Nether Portal, generally speaking, is more single target focused. But if you want to play with it early on, by all means do so. I will just be recommending the Guillotine and Expendables build, because I prefer it and I feel like it's a lot more mobile for us at the moment, and a lot more adaptable as well, because you've got to remember Guillotine's a 45-second cooldown, so we have 1 minute, 2 minute, and a 45-second, which it feels a lot more forgiving when we're playing it. But I will leave the final decision to you. And on that note, I really will end the video. If you've liked it, please do hit me with a like, a subscribe, and a comment below. And I will see you all in the next one. Take care, folks, and have a great day.